Hey guys, welcome to this session on how to create your first website using ReactJS. ReactJS is by far one of the most popular front-end libraries and it's most widely used to build user interface components, but it's a little difficult to get started with. So keeping that in mind, we've come up with this session to help you get started with ReactJS and help you realize how easy it is to build components and embed them in your website or to build a full-fledged website using ReactJS. So let's get started. But before we begin, we'd just like to point out that if you have any questions regarding how you can get started with React.js and how you can learn the advanced concepts in React.js in order to become a full stack developer, or if you want to learn the advanced concepts in React.js alone, stick with us till the end of the presentation and we'll guide you through some of the resources that are needed for you to learn React.js. So with that in mind, let's take a look at the agenda for the session. So in this session, we'll begin by taking a look at what is React.js. We'll demystify what React.js is all about. Then we'll take a look at the advantages of using React.js. We'll take a look at the disadvantages of using React.js as well. Then we'll take a look at the different ways of building a website in React.js. As it turns out, there can be multiple ways of building a website in React.js. So you can choose different ways depending on how you want to use React.js in your website. And then you can take a look at a demo in which we will create a component using React.js in our website and embed it in our website. With that in mind, let's get started. So we have the first question in our mind, which is what is ReactJS? ReactJS is simply a UI library. A UI library is simply nothing more than just a library that allows you to develop self-contained user interface component. A user interface component is anything that the user can interact with. So it could be an image carousel, it could be a button, it could be a form, and each component is then can be embedded within other components as well. So if you have a form that could contain an input, buttons, and so on, and all of these could be components that could be nested inside one another in order to build the user interface. So that's what React.js does. React.js allows you to write declarative code in JavaScript to efficiently piece together the user interface. Now, the reason why React.js is so popular is because it allows you to write the code that is needed to define your user interface declaratively. That means when a person looks at the code, they can easily understand what the person who's trying to build the user interface is trying to build. What are the components needed to build this application? And the other part is that React.js does it really efficiently. So in case you have not noticed, you could build the user interface using just pure DOM queries in which you can just create the element, set the data, and then embed it inside the document. That's quite good, but it comes with certain disadvantages. First things first, that if you have dynamically updating data in which you are fetching data from a user interface or you're getting data from a WebSocket that is, for instance, a chat server, then you need to dynamically insert new nodes and then update the user interface. Now you could not do that with simple JavaScript, because if you have data embedded in multiple places and being displayed in multiple places, when you get new data, you need to then keep track of all the places where the data is being displayed and then update those components accordingly. That's a lot of work, and if not done correctly, could lead your application to feel really slow, really laggy, really buggy. On the other hand, React.js will take care of all of this for you. You just need to take care of how you wish your user interface to look, what data does your user interface needs to know about, and how does the data flow from your user interface components from one component to the other component. That's all taken care of by you, and React.js takes care of the internal plumbing of the user interface. So let's take a look at some of the advantages of using React.js. So React.js has several advantages. The first one is that it's scalable. Scalability is a big part of any application framework. React.js is extremely scalable, mainly because React.js is built from the ground up to build user interfaces in a very efficient manner. React.js is used in all kinds of applications, ranging from small to-do list applications to large e-commerce applications like Flipkart. E-commerce applications use React.js, especially Flipkart is a really good example because they have created their entire user interface using React.js. Now, other applications, discarding the e-commerce examples, we have Facebook and Instagram, which are big social media platforms. They use React.js as well. Facebook is the company that has created React.js, and they use it extensively in their own applications, ranging from mobile web applications to entire native mobile applications as well. Then comes compositional UI. One of the most interesting features of React.js is that it allows us to create user interfaces using components. These components can be composed together to build a tree hierarchy, such as the DOM tree, and React will take care of updating everything for you. So all you have to do is you have to define the user interface of your application and define where the data comes from and how the data flows and how the data can be manipulated. Define the valid contract between your data and your user interface, and React will take care of it all. So if, for instance, you have a button that is allowed to change some data, let's say that you have a button that removes an item from your cart and updates the total price. So all you have to do is define how that data is going to be affected when the button is clicked, and React.js will take care of updating that data for you. So that's why React.js is so popular, because it allows us to create components which can be modified, reused, and even replaced if the need be. Then there's portability. Portability is one of the major features of React.js. React components are quite portable. So when you have two applications that are using React.js, it's quite easy for you to take one component that has been created using React.js and then put it in other applications as well. In fact, many companies do this. They have created their own design systems in which they have created multiple applications or multiple views of their single component. So for instance, a component could have a dark theme, a light theme, and an inverted color theme, in which grayscale becomes white and white becomes grayscaled and everything in between. So in case if the user selects the dark theme, the entire component is unmounted and new dark components are mounted in their places. On the other hand, there are other ways of doing this as well, more efficient ways in which you just define the data that you want to change, and based on that data, dark theme is applied. But that's a little advanced topic, and stick with us till the end, where we will teach you how you can learn these things. And then there's performance. So React.js is quite performant, mainly because it uses virtual DOM. Virtual DOM is the piece of technology that allows React.js to efficiently update the DOM or the underlying browser DOM. So what happens is React.js constructs its own DOM or tree hierarchy of components and maps it to the real browser DOM. Then when we make changes to any of the data points, our React.js engine will take a look at the components that is referencing the data. It will update the components and then replace those components in the real DOM. Instead of updating the whole parent, it will strategically update just a few children that need the upgrade. And that way, your browser remains responsive and works really well. So that's why React.js has a massive performance boost over using DOM manipulations, mainly because in DOM manipulation you would have to unmount an entire component and remount all the components and then attach event handlers, and that could be a really difficult task. Now, all is not that good because React.js does have a few disadvantages as well. So let's take a look at what could be the disadvantages in React.js. React.js has a big learning curve. So when we talk about learning curve, what we're trying to talk about is React.js takes a bit of shift in the mental model when you come to think about user interfaces. So what it really means is that when you have an application that you're trying to build using the old school syntaxes, you would have HTML page, CSS pages, and JavaScript files, in which the HTML page contains the markups, CSS contains styles, and JavaScript contains the markup, in which when the user interacts with the HTML page, the events are sent to the JavaScript, intercepted by JavaScript, extracted the information, and then changes the user interface elements if needed. So that's not the way we do it in React. In React, we take care of the user interface and other things are taken care of by React. So we just take care of how the data is supposed to be displayed and what changes are allowed to the data and how changes in the data will affect the user interface, and that's about it. Then there's documentation. So since React.js has a steep learning curve and it requires a bit of a shift in mental model, the documentation out there, although quite good, keeps changing because new updates are being rolled out every now and then. React.js is one of the most fastly updated user interface libraries, and it's in its 16th version right now, and new features are being released every time. So documentation might not always be present or up to the advanced versions that are available right now. And there are multiple ways of doing some things. Previous ways have been discarded, new ways have been presented, and some documentation might still be referencing old ways of doing things. So you need to be very careful about where you learn these things from. Then there's JSX. JSX is essentially an extension to the JavaScript syntax that allows us to write code that looks like HTML. It isn't exactly HTML, and it gets compiled to JavaScript. But what it does is that allows us to create HTML-like components by using JavaScript. So using JSX, what we can do is we can write our user interface using HTML-like syntax. JSX compiler will take care of converting that HTML bit into plain JavaScript, which React will understand, and then it will build the user interface for us. But JSX does take a bit of learning, so that's a bit of a problem. And then comes state management. State management basically means state is anything that your application has a knowledge about, any data that your application has knowledge about. So if you're building an e-commerce website, the things that might come under your application state is the information about the user, the items in his cart, his preferences, the user's wish list, and many other things. So managing that could be a little difficult depending on how your application is structured. Sharing data between components can be very difficult as well. Suppose you have two components that are being rendered on same levels on the tree hierarchy. Now sharing data between them, you would have to share them with the parent, and the parent will then pass data from one child to other child, and that could be really complicated to wrap your head around. If you are someone who can wrap their head around like this, then it's really good. But if you can't, then it could be a little difficult. So do understand what you're trying to do there. Alright, now let's take a look at different ways that you can build a React.js websites. So React.js allows you to build websites using multiple ways. One of the ways you can do it is by using a server rendered components. So what that means is your HTML is generated by the server. It is sent to the browser instead of just sending a JavaScript file which will build the user interface, and then you build the user interface, small components inside the user interface that aren't critical to your application but are nice enhancements. This is why React.js is so scalable, because it allows you to build your applications in this way. So you could adopt it by firstly rendering everything in your server and then just adding a few components. And if they work out well, then you can expand to the next option, which is single page applications. Single page applications are basically you're just given an application shell, and every bit of content inside it is then generated by JavaScript. So it creates all the user interface components, it takes the data, creates the component, updates the DOM, and then shows it to you. Server's job is now only to just send the shell page, as well as sending the data that needs to be populated for your user interface, and that's about it. So there's very clear separation, but it's a higher learning curve. You need to learn about a lot about routing, state management, and a lot of different things. Whereas in components, you would just have to use these little tiny pieces that you can embed in your website. Finally, there are React.js frameworks. So frameworks allow you to do very powerful things, but they come at the cost of losing some of the autonomy. So if you're using a framework in React.js such as Next.js or Gatsby.js, they allow you to build really powerful applications really quickly. But in order to build these applications quickly, you do need to learn a bit about these frameworks, and they will do a lot of magical things behind the scenes so that you don't have to do it. You wouldn't have any idea how they did it. You're just going to be able to tell it to do certain things, and you'll just be able to rely on the promise that it'll work. So that's the disadvantages of using React.js frameworks. You can use it, and in larger contexts you should, but for smaller applications you can use server rendered components. If for instance you have a medium sized application, single page application is fine, but if the complexity is really large, then maybe a framework is a good choice for you. Now we've come to the demo. So let me just show you what the demo is going to be about. So in Firefox, I've opened a web page. It's completely blank, and in Visual Studio Code I have the code here. Let me just add an H1 tag, React form. I save it, refresh it, and as you can see, it shows the React form. Now, just let me quickly explain what are the things. We have a div with the ID of app. For following along, you do need to know a little bit of HTML and a little bit of JavaScript, but that's the prerequisite for building React.js apps as well. Then you need to learn the React.js. We have imported React.js. We have imported React DOM as well. These two libraries are separate because React.js can be used in mobile applications, in building mobile applications as well using React Native, and in building virtual reality applications as well using React VR. So you can use that. And we have ReactJS as well. So this is the main engine. This is the abstraction that works with the browser DOM, and this is the Babel compiler. What that does is that it converts our JSX into React.createElement calls, or basically transpiles it back into normal JavaScript. Now our task is to create a form that is handled by React. So let me just show you how that would work. The first thing you would have to do is create a component. In React, you can create components using functions or classes. I prefer functions because they allow you to write smaller code and they are more concise. So since we're creating a form, I'll just create a form component. Right. Now, if I want to accept some data in form from the user, then I could create a props object that will be passed into my function. But since I don't want anything to be exposed by the user, I'm going to do everything by myself. So just to show you how you can display a simple component, this is what it looks like. Yeah. So this is our component. I can just remove the curly braces and the syntaxes as well. Now all I have to do is use dom.render. This tells it to render my form component and render it inside an element that has an ID of app. So what it's going to do, it's going to use this to generate the HTML. This is going to be the HTML that it generates and then embedded inside this. So if I open up my browser, refresh it, as you can see, it's created this. Now, if I were to click here, as you can see inside my app, hopefully you guys can see this. Let me just expand this a bit more. So as you can see, right inside my app, I have an h1 tag that describes my form. Now, I don't need the h1 tag. I only put it here because I wanted to show you how things are done. Now I need to create a form. So first, the way I like to do it is create my markup. For that, I need a form. The action, I can just put it blank because I'm not going to do anything. And here we'll take care of event handling as well. Now I need a label. Instead of for, I would have to use HTML4 mainly because for is a keyword in JavaScript. So here I will use the name username. Then I have to create an input of type text, and that input has to have an ID of username. This is mainly for a for label. I have to do the same thing for password as well. So let me just do this. Fine. So we have these things. Another thing that I would have to change is I would have to create a password. So now that is done, it will, I think it will display a form. Finally, I have to create input of type submit, and we will change the value to be submit form. If I go here, if I refresh, it's going to take some time, but it's going to render it out, and here it is. So our form looks good, but there is a problem. We don't have any way of adding any data to it. This is where state comes into play. So React allows us to create things called uh, state variables that take care of internal data that our application needs to keep track of. So here it needs to keep track of the user and username and password. So here I'll just create using React.use state. Again, the syntax might look a bit weird, so don't worry about it. So stick with us till the end of the presentation and we'll show you what each of you is doing, and we'll guide you through some of the resources that can help you out as well. So we have a function for set username, and we have a username variable that will store this data. What state variables do is that they keep track of where they are being displayed. So if I display it in some place in my username, whenever it changes, my user interface will update automatically. So I'll just show you. So the first thing I have to do is at the input, I have to make the value to be username. And now on chain, this is where the event handling is done. I take the event and I have to use the set username function, event.target.value. Right. So now, right below my form, if I were to display the username, go here, refresh, everything's fine. Now if I type in ANTY, as you can see, it's being displayed here automatically and it's updating automatically as well. I don't have to do anything about it. React is taking care of its form. This is called one-way data binding. So now let me just remove this, and I have to do something similar for the password field as well. And is going to be empty from the beginning. And here for value, I have to change it to be password on change. I get the event, and I want to set the password to be the value. Notice that we're not accessing any DOM elements. We're just keeping track of the data. That's one of the recommendations for React, that you shouldn't be handling changing DOM elements. You can do it, and there's a concept called the ref that allows you to do it, but it's not recommended right at the beginning. And try to avoid it if you can. So we're changing the username, we're changing the password. This basically means that whenever input inside this data inside this input changes, send me an event and set the password to be the value of that event target. Event target is the element and the target's value is the text that we have typed. So we have done that. And now all I have to do is on submit. And here I'll just name a function, handle submit. The reason why, because it could be a little more than just a single line. So I don't want to muddle up my code. Here I can get the event. And firstly, I want to prevent the default behavior, which is it submitting data to the server. I don't want it to do that, so it won't do it. So I've prevented the default behavior. Now all I have to do is I'll just log to the console the username and password that we have stored. And finally, the only thing that's left is I have to set username to be nothing and set password to be nothing as well. So now let's take a look at what we have. Firstly, I would have to refresh my page. So I refreshed it. It's rendering the component after passing in the data. So username, password, as you can see, it's being submitted in the password format. Click on submit form. It's asking me, would I like to save it? No, I wouldn't. Click on console. And as you can see, okay, I have got an error. It says console is not defined. Oh, I mistyped things. Console. Refresh. Username, WORD, password. Go to the console. Submit. I think I forgot to refresh it correctly. Yeah. Now it's working. Finally, if I submit it, okay, I don't want to save it, and it's showing me username and password here in my console. Everything's working fine. Now, if I wanted to, I could have easily sent a request to the HTTP server in which I could validate the data and then log user in, or I could have done a lot of different things, but this is how you do things in React. So just to recap, what you do is you create a ReactJS application, create an empty div with with an ID of app. You can create an ID of whatever you want. I use the ID of app because it's more explicit. Import the packages by referencing them in your script tags, then create your React.js code inside a script type text slash babel. If you're not using JSX, then you don't have to use text slash babel. You can just use text slash JavaScript or no type at all, because that's what it defaults to. And then this is the code that we've typed. We have a form that when submitted would prevent the default behavior and set the username and password to be null, and then console.log username and password. That's fine. Okay, so that is done. We have the label, and this is what it means to be declarative, because now all I have to do when I want to show a form is use this code. It's showing the form, and if the user wants to know how this form is implemented, they can take a look at the markup, they can take a look at the user interface. If you want to style it yourself, you can do that as well. So with that, we've come to the end of the demo, and now we'll take a look at how you can learn more about this. So let's take a look at that.